Welcome Life Science learners to another installment. Trust that you guys are well and looking forward to our lesson today. In our lesson today, we're going to be focusing on nutrition and specifically looking at homeostasis, disorders and different diets. It's important that at this point we're able to reflect on the process that has happened in the process of nutrition. We've reflected on the process of chemical digestion. Today we're going to look at what happens in the body to maintain the balance when food is absorbed into the cells as the building blocks. And that's important in us understanding what homeostasis is. So let's have an overview of the main concepts. Let's unpack some terminology, and then we will look at those important organs that maintain the process of homeostasis. Let's get straight into the lesson, folks. So guys, as I mentioned, we've got to start off always by looking at some important terms, and I'd like to review the core concepts of our lesson before we move further on. It's important that we understand and recollect the overview process of digestion, and that's fundamental and important to understanding any process relating to nutrition. So understanding what happens during digestion is important. Again, it's important that we look at the organs, both the important parts of the digestive system as well as the accessory organs that are associated with the alimentary canal. We're going to spend some time unpacking what homeostasis is and its role in controlling the blood glucose level. It's important that we understand that there are different mechanisms in the body that maintain what we refer to as the body in a normal condition. So having excess glucose, amino acids, fatty acids and glycerol are important and can create abnormalities in the body. So the body has to constantly maintain what we refer to as a constant internal environment, and that term is homeostasis. We also will spend some time looking at different diets, and we do know that obviously this is influenced culturally as well as by choice of people in terms of what they eat. And so we will look at some different diets that people adopt, as well as we'll look at some nutritional disorders and what is a disorder and how that is affected by the diet that we consume. And finally, we're going to spend some time looking at what allergies are, supplements, as well as reading nutritional information. And we often buy food products and we see a little table of all the different nutrients on them. It's important that you understand what that table means. And so we'll spend some time looking at that nutritional information that we see on the packaging. And finally, we'll hopefully get to some revision activities where we can apply some of our understanding that we've had through the lesson in attempting a few questions based on that. So let's get straight into looking at some important terminology. As I mentioned, the term homeostasis, if we break up the word homeostasis, it refers to two words, home, which refers to environment, and stasis, again, refers to a process of being constant. So if you were to unpack that, it's the ability of an organism to maintain stable internal conditions or environments. And this is important for us to be able to recognize. We talk about the body temperature being constant. So that's one homeostasis mechanism that the body carries out, keeping the body at a constant temperature. We also know that there is a chemical balance that the body needs to maintain, and that's with regards to the balance of the pH of blood, the amount of oxygen, the amount of carbon dioxide. All those need to be perfectly managed in balance. And this occurs by a process, as I mentioned, called homeostasis. There is a mechanism that controls this process, and that mechanism is called the negative feedback mechanism. Guys, another word for negative is opposite. So if you think about that, so it's an opposite process. Feedback is, again, a process that refers to giving a reply to, a response to. So again, let's unpack negative meaning and opposite. Feedback would be a reply. So if we look at that, these are mechanisms in the human body that respond or detect changes or imbalances in the internal conditions and restore that balance. So let me give you an example of that. So when we consume a meal, we know that during the process of digestion that the carbohydrates will be broken up into simple sugars such as glucose. The sugar levels will gradually increase, and so at a point it becomes higher than normal. So the mechanisms in the body responds to that increase in level to bring the body back to a balance. And that balance we refer to as is homeostasis. So we will spend some time looking at the negative feedback mechanism in maintaining a constant internal environment. Blood glucose is a concept that we will unpack, and we talk about blood glucose, and sometimes we tend to use the word your sugar levels. Well, that's correct, but I'd like to remind you that what we referred to is the glucose molecules in the blood. Remember that ultimately, after a meal, your complex molecules are broken down into their simplest molecules. Carbohydrates are broken down into glucose molecules, which then flow in the bloodstream to be absorbed by the cells to be used for cellular respiration. So that is what blood glucose refers to. And essentially there is a level of blood glucose that we refer to as being within the norm or normal. So we will have to look at what normal blood glucose levels are and how the body maintains that within a balance. We're going to spend some time looking at two important hormones, insulin and glucagon. And these are hormones again that are responsible for maintaining the blood sugar levels in the body. And finally, we're going to talk about a complex form of a carbohydrate, which is called glycogen. And glycogen again is a complex carbohydrate. Essentially, the glucose is converted and stored in the body as a complex form of a carbohydrate called glycogen. Okay? As we get into this lesson, we've got to review the process of digestion. Remember that the process of digestion occurs across the body in several different stages. The first stage is ingestion, and if you remember, ingestion is the taking in of food through the mouth. The second process is digestion, and if we recall, digestion again means breaking that down. And digestion happens through two processes: a physical breakdown, which happens in the mouth where we chew our food, as well as a chemical breakdown, which happens using enzymes. And that refers to digestion. And once digestion occurs, we know that the food has been broken up into its simplest molecules. We would then need to absorb those nutrients, the building blocks of those complex molecules, into the bloodstream and then transport them to cells where they are assimilated, meaning used up. And finally, we talk about egestion, which is the release of the parts that have not been used or parts that are not needed by the body. And so we refer to that as egestion. So to sum that up, here's a simple flow diagram that shows you the process of digestion and what happens in the body. It's important as we get into the lesson that I'll remind you of the organs that play an important role. In our lesson today, we're going to focus on the pancreas and its role in maintaining homeostasis. Again, if we recollect that the pancreas is an accessory organ, meaning that food does not pass through it, but it is important in producing important enzymes and hormones in assisting the digestive system carrying out its function. So as an overview, guys, remember that we're focusing on homeostasis and the role of the pancreas. So the pancreas has two important roles. One is that it produces digestive enzymes, and these enzymes are released into the duodenum, which is the first part of the small intestine, and those enzymes play an important role in chemical digestion. We also know that the pancreas plays an important endocrine function. Endocrine refers to the production of hormones, and so this organ has cells that produce hormones such as insulin and glucagon, and we will discuss that in a bit. And so we see how important the pancreas is in this process, which we're going to discuss in a bit. So guys, we've had an overview of the pancreas in terms of its function. Let's have a little break, and when we get back, we will look at the pancreas in detail and understand how homeostasis occurs. See you in a bit. Welcome back, Life Science learners. Let's continue with our lesson. A recap of what we're looking at today. Today we're focusing on nutrition, but we're looking at homeostasis, and we're looking at some nutritional disorders, and we're going to spend some time looking at different diets. In this part of the lesson, we're going to focus on specifically the role of the pancreas in maintaining homeostasis. As I mentioned earlier on, the pancreas is an important endocrine organ as well as an organ that produces enzymes. We're going to focus on just the endocrine function in terms of the hormones that are produced. Let's have an overview of the structure of the pancreas. Let's see where its location is and try and understand its role in controlling blood glucose levels. So guys, when we look at the pancreas, it's often not visibly seen because we have it covered by what we refer to as the liver. So it's located just below the liver and behind the stomach. So that's an outline of the stomach which sits right in front of it. So we normally don't see that it's there in the back, but it is. If I were to undo my scribbling, I'm going to undo that very quickly for you. You can see that it's clearly an elongated leaf-shaped structure, which you see, and it supplies the duodenum here through a duct called the pancreatic duct. So this little tube or duct transfers the enzymes that are responsible for the digestion process. So we have food that comes in from the stomach into the first part of the small intestine called the duodenum. And it is in the duodenum that the pancreas releases enzymes that now carry out the enzymatic function. So essentially breaking down the products of digestion from the stomach using enzymes. And that we refer to as the enzyme function of the pancreas. However, the pancreas also contains parts or cells that produce hormones. And so those cells are situated here, and they play an important role in the production of hormones, which we will unpack in a little while. So it's important that you understand the position. As I mentioned here, it's just above the small intestine, but in front of the stomach. You'll find that we've got the pancreas sitting at the back. Let's move on to unpacking the role of the pancreas. So the pancreas serves two functions, as I mentioned, in the breakdown of starch. It produces enzymes which break down the starch, which are called amylases, and these basically are released from the exocrine glands. And exocrine refers to parts that release their secretions through tubes. And so this duct or tube that carries the enzymes out is part of the exocrine function of the pancreas. Okay, and that is released into the first part of the small intestine called the duodenum. So your amylases, your carbohydrases, your lipases or lipid digesting enzymes are all released into the duodenum. Okay, it produces hormones, insulin as well as glucagon, which are then released from the endocrine glands. And the endocrine glands, watch the space, are called the eyelids of Langerhans. So what does this point to? So on the pancreas here, we've got some cells that are called the eyelids of Langerhans. So the pancreas is the organ, and in that we've got some tissue called the eyelids of Langerhans, and these cells collectively produce the hormones, insulin, as I mentioned, as well as glucagon. Now let's pause at that point. So guys, we've mentioned the word glucose, which is a type of sugar or carbohydrate. We now mention that there are two hormones that are produced. The one hormone is called insulin, and that's easy to remember. The other hormone is called glucagon. And the reason why I pause at this moment is often we get learners that confuse glucose with the hormone glucagon. And so let's try and understand that glucagon is a hormone and glucose is a type of carbohydrate, which is the monomer or the simplest building blocks of glucose. Right. So let's look at the function of insulin and glucagon in regulating the blood glucose level. Right. So the hormones insulin and glucagon regulate the concentration of glucose in the bloodstream. Essentially what we say is that these two hormones function to maintain the blood glucose level at some balance. It's important that we understand that these two hormones function slightly different from each other. One is important in reducing the blood sugar levels, and the other allows for the blood sugar levels to increase to bring it back to normal. So think of a seesaw where you've got insulin on one end and you've got the other hormone, glucagon, on the other end. And these two hormones try and manipulate the blood sugar levels, either bringing them down or increasing them. And so they work opposite each other. And another word for opposite that we use is antagonistically. So I'll repeat the word. It's called antagonistic hormones, where they function slightly different to the way they are meant to function. And we'll unpack that as we get into the details of this. So let's look at insulin. So the function of insulin is that it lowers the blood glucose level by increasing the glycogen synthesis and storage in the liver and adipose tissue. Guys, so insulin plays an important role. So let's try and understand what insulin does. So insulin helps the glucose, which I've indicated here, to be moved out of the blood vessels into the cells. So insulin allows for that absorption to be increased. So we refer to insulin playing an important role in reducing the blood sugar levels, and some of that is then stored in our liver as glycogen. And so I've mentioned the word glycogen now. So let's pause at that moment. We've referred to a hormone called glucagon, and now we have a type of complex sugar called glycogen. Again, easily confused terms. So let's talk about the two sugars. The one sugar is glucose, which is the simplest sugar, which is what the body breaks down all complex carbohydrates to. So glucose is the simplest sugar that flows in our bloodstream. However, in order for us to get rid of that sugar, we need to store it in our liver and muscle cells as a complex form of carbohydrate. That carbohydrate is called glycogen. Notice we've got two hormones, insulin and glucagon. And so fundamentally, do not confuse glycogen with glucagon. And so just hold on to that thought as we get into the further explanation. So glucagon, as I mentioned, I've pointed that out to you, does the opposite of what insulin does. So glucagon helps to increase the blood sugar levels, limiting the synthesis and storage of glycogen by the liver and the adipose tissue. So we've got insulin that helps to decrease the blood sugar levels by absorbing that glucose into the cells and converting and storing that in the liver and in the fat and the adipose tissue. The other hormone, which is what we've just looked at, glucagon, does the opposite of that. So when your blood sugar levels drop, the glucagon is going to convert what we've stored in our liver and fat and release that back into the bloodstream to increase the blood sugar levels so that we have the glucose to provide energy for cellular respiration. So that's the overview of that. Here's an image that it's good to look at so that we have the fundamental understanding between what the pancreas does. So here we've got the pancreas indicated as this leaf-shaped structure. We've indicated this as being the digestive tract, and here you're seeing the enzymes being released and the amylase enzymes, which are the exocrine function, and this scissors indicates the chemical breakdown of the complex food groups that are coming in from the stomach. We also know that the pancreas, as I mentioned, has the endocrine function, and in this case produces these two hormones, insulin and glucagon. Those two hormones are released and they allow for the bloodstream to control the blood glucose levels, either by allowing the liver to absorb the glucose as indicated here and store that complex glucose as glycogen, or the opposite, release the glucose, which is in a complex molecule, back into glucose so that we have blood glucose levels available for cellular respiration. Right. So let's try and understand the role of the pancreas in this process. So the body needs glucose, as I mentioned, to make ATP during a process called cellular respiration. So guys, when we looked at the mitochondria in the past, we said that it's important for cellular respiration. For cellular respiration, you need glucose. So the glucose that we get from the meals that we digest is absorbed by the cells, and that glucose then enters the mitochondria where glycolysis happens, and it goes through the process of producing ATP. So we need glucose to make ATP, which is the energy carrier molecule. Okay? And so what happens here is that the amount of energy will fluctuate depending on the demand of the body. So guys, when you are active and if you have a meal, the glucose is then used to fuel cellular respiration to provide you with ATP for being physically active. However, there are times when you consume a meal and you're not active. So what happens to the glucose then? The body responds to that and stores that excess glucose to be used later as glycogen, and in some instances will store some as fat. So again, we'll talk about having an active lifestyle and what that has got to do with maintaining your blood sugar levels. So the high levels of glucose in the blood can obviously damage the cells and create what we refer to as an unstable internal environment. And so when we have lots of glucose in our blood, it affects the balance of the blood. So we refer to the blood as becoming hypotonic, meaning having a high concentration of sugar. And this is not ideal for cellular functioning. So the body has to compensate for that by getting rid of the blood glucose from the bloodstream and storing that in the liver. So you'll see that it hence then takes the glucose and it helps to regulate that by converting it into glycogen. And that's the role of insulin. The two antagonistic hormones, which we've just discussed, are responsible for regulating the blood glucose level concentrations. Insulin helps to bring the blood glucose levels down by allowing it to be absorbed in the liver and muscle cells. And glucagon will do the opposite, and it will increase the breakdown and release of stored glycogen from the liver, releasing it back into the bloodstream. And this then gives us the necessary glucose for cellular respiration. These hormones are released from the pancreatic pits, and those tissues are called the islets of Langerhans. So it's a patch of cells in the pancreas here, as you would see, that produce insulin and glucagon. And these are principally act on the liver. Why on the liver? Because that is where the stored complex sugar called glycogen is kept, and so it will either convert the glucose into complex glycogen, or glucagon breaks that down into simple glucose, releasing it into the bloodstream. Okay, so as we wrap this segment up, let's look at the regulation of blood glucose concentration. So it's important that we have an overview of this as we talk about homeostasis. It's important that we remember that homeostasis is maintaining a balance, and these two hormones will do what they need to do to keep the blood sugar levels within a constant internal balance. So let's start off with what happens when we have a meal. When we have a meal, that meal will go through a process of chemical breakdown and mechanical breakdown to produce the simple molecules, in this case, sugar. The sugar levels will then increase in the bloodstream, causing an increase in the blood sugar levels throughout the body. Cells in the pancreas respond to that change by producing insulin. The insulin will then respond to that increase in blood sugar levels and allow for glucose to be absorbed by the liver as well as some of the cells in the body, which is your adipose tissue. That will then in turn reduce the blood sugar levels in the bloodstream, bringing it back to normal because it's now stored in the liver and muscle cells. However, you now begin to exercise and you find that as you exercise, you need the energy for cellular respiration. So after a little while, the blood sugar levels in the blood decrease because you've now used that energy for cellular respiration. That decrease is then detected by cells in the pancreas called the alpha cells. These alpha cells will stimulate the pancreas to release the hormone called glucagon. Glucagon will then move into the bloodstream, get into the liver, where it will help the liver to break down the stored glycogen back into glucose, releasing that back into the bloodstream, thereby bringing the blood sugar levels back to normal. So, if we look at this mechanism, we see that that's the balance, and we see that there is an increase, and that is maintained by insulin, and when there is a decrease in the blood sugar level, that is maintained by glucagon. So guys, this fundamentally is the mechanism that we refer to as the negative feedback to maintain homeostasis. Welcome back, Life Science learners. Let's continue with our lesson. A recap of what we're doing. Today we're focusing on homeostasis. In our lesson, we're going to focus now on some disorders such as diabetes. We'll also look at some other nutritional disorders and how they affect individuals. Let's get straight into the lesson, have an overview of some basic concepts around the regulation of blood sugar levels, and then we will unpack what diabetes mellitus is. Let's recap what homeostasis is. And homeostasis, again, simply put, is maintaining a constant internal environment. The context of this is important because when we unpack nutritional disorders, we find that one of the biggest challenges we find with maintaining your diet is maintaining a blood sugar level within the norm. So many individuals struggle to do this, and we find that that results in certain nutritional disorders such as diabetes. So we're going to look at what happens to the mechanism and how that results in conditions such as diabetes mellitus. Okay? The concept of negative feedback, again, it's important for us to recognize that negative feedback refers to processes in the body that respond in an opposite manner to a change. I'll say that again. Negative is an opposite, feedback is a response, and mechanism is a process. So if we put that together, it essentially points to processes in the body that respond in an opposite manner to bring about homeostasis. And essentially this is what maintains the blood sugar levels within the body within a normal level. And we find that this process of negative feedback mechanism is fundamental to many other processes in the body. Today we talk about blood glucose, and blood glucose essentially refers to the level of glucose in the blood, and that often is measured depending on when an individual has had a meal and the level of glucose in their body after a specific meal. Okay. Finally, we're going to look at the two hormones that are important in regulating blood sugar levels. And these hormones are insulin and glucagon. And remember that these are produced by the pancreas, which is an endocrine gland. Finally, we talk about a complex glucose molecule or carbohydrate in which the glucose is stored as glycogen. And so we find that when the blood sugar levels are high, with the assistance of the hormone insulin, the glucose is stored and converted into a complex form called glycogen. And this is essentially the reserve glucose that the body relies on when the blood sugar levels fall below the norm. And so it's important that we equip ourselves with these terms. Let's look at what happens when an individual is not able to control their blood sugar level. And guys, it's a disorder that is common to many South Africans. We around the world, we know that many individuals are affected by a condition called diabetes mellitus. Let's try and unpack the word diabetes and mellitus. Essentially, the word diabetes refers to the production of large amounts of fluid, such as urine. So individuals that are affected by diabetes produce large volumes of urine. The word mellitus points to sugary or syrupy. So let's put that together. So it's urine that is syrupy or sweet or honey-like. And that's because individuals that are diabetic tend to frequently pass out urine that gets rid of the excess glucose in the body. So that is essentially what diabetes mellitus is. So we'll unpack that as a disorder which is as a result of the body's inability to control blood sugar levels. Right. So diabetes is a disorder characterized by high blood sugar levels or high blood glucose levels, resulting in increased fatigue, dehydration, and a lack of energy. Let's try and unpack that. So if you know of a family member or relative, or you yourself are affected by diabetes, you will notice that the symptoms of fatigue set in. Fatigue essentially is because the blood glucose is present in the bloodstream and does not get into the cells, because insulin is not able to allow for the glucose to be absorbed into the cells to be used for cellular respiration. So lots of that glucose remains in the bloodstream, and then it's filtered out and released as urine. So the energy that we would get from the glucose is not used but passed out in urine. And that's the reason why individuals that have diabetes are generally very tired or experience extreme fatigue. It's because they cannot absorb that glucose and use it by the muscle cells to produce ATP. A second symptom is that they experience dehydration. Dehydration again points to the body losing a lot of water, so they tend to be dehydrated and frequently thirsty. And finally, they lack energy. As I mentioned, if you think about energy, energy comes from the glucose. If that energy is not used, if that energy is not produced by the mitochondria, individuals will lack energy and there will be fatigue. So you'll find that individuals that are diabetic show those basic symptoms. Guys, there are two types of diabetes if we broadly speak about that. Type 1 and type 2. What is the difference between these two? Let's unpack that. So the type 1 diabetes essentially is an inherited disorder, and it is a result of insulin producing cells in the body being destroyed. So we refer to type 1 as an inherited disorder where the immune system attacks and destroys the cells that make insulin. So it's often referred to as an autoimmune disorder, meaning that the body's immune system destroys the cells that produce insulin. That is inherited, and you don't have control over that. Okay? If we compare that to type 2 diabetes, this is when the body develops resistance to insulin, and this is I often refer to it as a lifestyle disorder. Because of choices in our diet, we consume diets high in carbohydrates and sugar, where the pancreas needs to constantly produce insulin to reduce the blood sugar levels. And in doing so, gradually builds up resistance. So I use this as an analogy of when you take a medication, say a paracetamol, and you constantly take that every day. At some point, when you do need to take that for a headache, it's not going to have the same effect because you've built up some form of resistance to it. And so that is essentially what we refer to as type 2 diabetes. We also know that the treatment of type 1 diabetes is slightly different. This is a lifelong disorder where an individual is affected for the rest of their life, and they require daily injections of insulin and a specially adapted diet. They need to constantly monitor their blood sugar levels and take insulin regularly to adapt their diets. However, when we compare that to type 2 diabetes, this is basically maintaining a balanced diet where individuals need to monitor their blood sugar levels, need to ensure that they choose foods that do not increase their blood sugar levels. They need to exercise regularly and use medication to control their blood sugar levels. And so we find that these two disorders are crucial to us understanding the difference. So let's look at what happens and what do we mean by. So under normal circumstances, guys, we find that insulin, which is indicated in this, allows for the glucose to enter the cells. However, in a person that has type 1 diabetes, we find that the insulin receptor becomes deactivated or destroyed, and hence they cannot activate the cells to take in the glucose, and hence there is no glucose entering the cells. If we compare that to type 2 diabetes, we find that due to a prolonged use of excessive amounts of insulin, that these cells become desensitized and are not effectively absorbing the insulin. And that is essentially the difference between the three types, where an individual has a normal physiology, type 1 being a condition that is as a result of an autoimmune condition which is inherited, and then type 2 being a disorder as a lifestyle decision or choice because of a diet or a lifestyle lacking in exercise, where the blood sugar levels remain constantly high and produces and results in the pancreas constantly having to produce insulin. Guys, we've looked at diabetes as a disorder where the pancreas cannot produce or control the regulation of blood sugar levels. It's important that we now take a little break. When we get back, we will look at other nutritional disorders and spend some time looking at what nutritional information is. So have a little comfort break, and I'll see you back in a little. Welcome back, life science learners, to our segment where we're looking at nutrition. We're now focusing on nutritional disorders. It's important that before we get into disorders that we understand what a balanced diet is. We've just looked at diabetes mellitus as a disorder where the body cannot regulate the blood sugar levels. It's important that we understand why it is important to have a balanced diet, and then we will look at what does it mean to have certain nutritional disorders. It's important that we understand that our diet needs to be balanced so that we have a sustainable diet which allows us to have the major food groups in it. So all of that in our segment now. So guys, a balanced diet. It's often confused with eating food. So having food is not necessarily what every individual needs. Having the right amounts of food in the correct proportions based on your lifestyle is important. That balance is crucial for you to have a good physiology and have a good metabolism. So let's try and unpack what a balanced diet is. A balanced diet should consist of all the necessary nutrients in their correct quantities. What does that mean? It means that there are certain nutritional groups, carbohydrates, proteins, fats and lipids, that are needed on a daily basis. Depending on individuals' lifestyle and their physiology, we might need different proportions of these. It's also important to realize that our diet needs to be managed depending on when we have a meal and how much we have. So we compare that to what the constituents or the makeup of breakfast is as compared to what happens at supper. So those are important when we're looking at a holistic balanced diet. Okay, so we need to get the correct quantities. We need carbohydrates, guys, and fats to provide the body with energy. Carbohydrates are the fuel that fuels the cells for cellular respiration. We need the right amount of carbohydrates so that we're not having excess of these that are then converted and stored as fat. We need fats as well, and fats are important because they provide essential building blocks for some of the fatty acids in the body. So we need to have that as well as carbohydrates. Proteins are used for building and repair of cells. So guys, proteins are broken down during digestion into amino acids. Those amino acids are then taken and put together to form enzymes, to form proteins, as well as to repair and restore damaged cells. as well as for the growth of tissue and organs. We need vitamins, minerals that are important to maintain the immune system and body processes. So these vitamins and minerals that we talk about, vitamin C, D, A, E, and K, are all crucial for not just a balanced diet, but important in production of antibodies, production of enzymes, production of structures that are important in maintaining important functioning of the body. Okay, so let's look at a balanced diet. So the amount of nutrients required is dependent on age, gender, and the level of activity. You would know that the younger you are, you need a diet that provides you with the essential nutrients that can fuel your active lifestyle. But as you age, you find that you'll need to review your diet because you're not as active as you were when you were young and active and growing up. So, depending on the age, we need to look at the balance of nutrients that are needed. We also need to look at the level of activity. If you are an active person, you need to be able to provide yourself with the necessary fuels that provide the energy for being active. Okay, so for example, growing children need more protein, and that protein is important to build and repair cells. So children grow quickly and rapidly, organs develop, bone and muscle develop. So you need the proteins which contain the building blocks that help to repair, regenerate body tissue. Active people require more energy foods that are going to give you a sustained release of energy. And men need more energy foods than women in terms of their physiology becoming active. This might vary depending on their diet. So if you're physically working out, whether you're male or female, you would need large amounts of energy that require food. If you are sitting in an office and if you're not as active as you are as doing physical labor, you would have to look at the food intake to ensure that the energy that you get from that is not more than what the body needs. So all of that needs to be considered. Right. And so this triangle essentially forms the pyramid when we're talking about maintaining a balanced diet. So the foods right on the top should be consumed less of, and the foods right at the bottom are what we should consume more of. So we talk about having lots of cereals and whole grains. That should be a larger proportion. We should also have fruit and vegetables, which are important for our vitamins, our important nutrients and antibodies. We then look at the consumption of your middle order, which is eating moderate amounts of dairy products, meat, fish, eggs, and beans, and these provide the proteins for repair, regeneration, and growth. And lastly, we need some oils, we need fats, salt, and sugar, but we need that in the moderate amounts, and these are often seen as the ones that are more likely to cause complications in the body if they are taken in excessively high amounts. As we talk about balanced diets, we need to recognize that individuals have different diets. What do I mean by that? There are a number of different diets that can be followed by people, and this comes from different cultures, different religions, and personal and health choices. And you would know that you've got friends or family that choose to consume foods depending on their culture, their religion, or their personal dietary requirements. So here's a quick synopsis of some comparisons between a few different diets. You would have heard of people that are vegan. And a vegan is an individual that does not eat any animal products such as meat, eggs, or milk. So they consume products that are not produced by any animal or contain no animal byproducts. And so that we refer to as vegan. We also have people that are vegetarian. And these are individuals that do not eat meat, but they eat dairy products and eggs. So you have vegetarians that choose to eat products that contains milk, but not necessarily having chicken or any other animal protein in them. We also would have heard of a diet which is halal. And then again, that's a diet followed by the Islamic faith, and they do not consume pork, alcohol, or carnivorous animals, or any food that comes in contact with carnivores. They basically slaughter the animal and they follow strict rules and will recite a prayer when doing that. And so that's a specific diet for individuals. We also know that we have a kosher meal, and these are followed by the Jewish faith, and also they do not eat pork, shellfish, or fish without fins or scales. No predatory birds either. So that's an overview of some of the different diets that you might come in contact with. Individuals, depending on their lifestyles, also choose to have different diets, and that's entirely left to individuals. But the important thing is that in many of these diets, they're often a discipline as well as for the benefit of individuals' health and well-being. Right. As we wrap this up, we need to talk about malnutrition. So guys, we often refer to a balanced diet consisting of the essential food groups. We also know that individuals that do not receive a balanced diet are affected in their lifestyle. We refer to that as malnutrition. So malnutrition occurs when a person does not follow a balanced diet. Okay? It can result in undernourishment, eating too little food, or overnourishment, eating too much of food. And so we talk about individuals having a large body mass, and that's due to the overconsumption of food, or individuals being underweight, and that's due to consuming or not consuming enough of the important food groups. Okay, this can lead to a number of different disorders or diseases. Okay, as we compare them, we'll have a quick overview of some nutritional disorders. A common one is called kwashiorkor, and this is a diet that lacks in protein, and it generally occurs in children. The symptom of that is that you have a swollen stomach and liver, the skin appears to present sores, and growth of these individuals are stunted. The next disorder that we can talk about is called marasmus, and this is a diet that lacks energy foods such as carbohydrates and fats. These individuals show thin muscle development. They are extremely thin as no fat deposits and accumulates in their body. They lack energy, and their eyes tend to be sunken in their eye sockets. We then have two other disorders which are called psychological disorders. One is called anorexia nervosa, and this is a condition where a person refuses to eat in fear of gaining weight, and these symptoms are seen as individuals having excessive weight loss to a point that it could be fatal. Another psychological condition is called bulimia. Again, it is a condition where a person regularly overeats and then induces vomiting to avoid gaining weight. Again, the fear of gaining weight will cause them to induce vomiting. These individuals often are dehydrated, show tooth decay, there is damage of the esophagus, and often have an electrolyte imbalance. As we wrap this up, there are other conditions where having a diet rich in fat can lead to coronary heart diseases or heart attacks. We discussed earlier on diabetes as a disorder due to poor diet, lack of exercise, which results in individuals not being able to control their blood sugar levels. And a common disorder prevalent in many countries is called obesity, and that's again due to a diet that is rich in energy foods such as sugars and fats, and it's often as a result of excessive deposits of fat, a decreased physical activity, and having a sedentary lifestyle. It's often seen in people that are type 2 diabetic, or people that suffer from hypertension or have a risk of heart diseases. So guys, that's a wrap for today. We've looked at nutritional disorders, we've looked at what a balanced diet is, we've also unpacked the concepts around being diabetic. I trust that you guys have engaged with this and are able to relate to the concept of how nutrition is important and having a balanced diet is important. From me, that I hope you guys can go away, reflect on what we've done, and make healthy choices about your diet. From me, Take care. Have a baie lekker day. Cheers.